Immersive learning. There are three types of immersive learning: virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. In virtual reality, everything the viewer encounters is a digital simulation. In augmented reality, viewers encounter digital objects in the real world. An example of this is Pokemon Go. Mixed reality is a combination of both virtual and augmented reality. I have three examples of immersive learning. The first is creating 3D virtual art. This is aimed at high school students. By utilizing a mixed reality, students will study 3D renderings of abstract art, then create their own versions to be displayed in virtual exhibition. Learning objectives for this experience are: students will be able to identify characteristics and themes of a selected artist, and students will be able to create virtual 3D artwork in by applying the characteristics and themes of their selected artists. This is an example of mixed reality. Our next example of immersive learning is the virtual career fair. This would be aimed at high school students or adult learners who are looking to change careers or start pursuing a career. By using virtual reality, learners have the opportunity to experience the hands-on tasks associated with a variety of careers. Learning objective for this experience would be: students will be able to practice a hands-on task on a multitude of careers in order to discover which ones they are most interested in pursuing. My final example is a microelectronics lab equipment training. The target audience would be adults, mostly employees and students working in the microelectronic, physics, and electrical engineering fields. Equipment used in microelectronics labs is very expensive and very sensitive. This VR training would allow learners to practice operating the equipment through a series of simulations before entering a physical lab. The learning objective for this training would be: students will be able to operate designated pieces of equipment in VR with 100% success rate 3 consecutive times before being allowed to use the physical equipment. Creating an immersive learning experience. Very first step in any learning experience is to conduct a needs analysis. In this case, electronic lab equipment is expensive and sensitive. Employees and students need to use the equipment for their research. Using virtual reality technology will reduce instances of operator error and damage to the equipment by allowing them to practice in a simulation. By passing the simulation, students will be certified to operate specific pieces of equipment. After the needs analysis, the next step is to design and develop your course. Using immersive learning best practices checklists to design and develop learning objectives, assessments, activities, engagements, interactions, and making sure to incorporate meaningful feedback. Here is the learning objectives checklist. I'm not going to go through it because we're going to go through each one individually after this. First thing you need to do is create clearly defined SMART learning objectives. In this case, students will be able to operate designated pieces of equipment in VR with 100% success rate 3 consecutive times before using the physical lab equipment. 2. Select the appropriate technology based on the learning objectives. This immersive learning experience will be created using virtual reality technology to simulate the conditions of a microelectronics lab, including wearing of protective equipment. It's important to focus on the interactivity. In this simulation, learners will put on protective equipment, complete the standard operating procedures for each piece of equipment, practice emergency protocols. It's important that your immersive learning experience not be passive. Instructions should be easily understood. Learners will be provided with both video instructions and written step-by-step instructions which they can refer to. Always include feedback and assessments. There are 2 modes for providing feedback and assessments. In this immersive learning environment, there will be a practice mode where learners receive feedback as they progress through each simulation, and allows learners to correct mistakes and continue with the simulation. In the assessment mode, if a mistake is made, the simulation ends and learners are provided feedback regarding their performance. They must then restart the simulation from the beginning. Like with all learning, facilitating interactions amongst learners is important. Learners will be encouraged to use each other as resources and to demonstrate proper usage of equipment as they progress through the simulations. It's important to make sure your content and simulations are realistic. In this case, learners will utilize VR headsets and haptic gloves to simulate the wearing of protective gear and the operation of various pieces of equipment. The virtual equipment will be to real world specs. When to implement this immersive learning experience, students will enroll in the VR training course. All students will be required to pass the lab safety and emergency procedures course before moving on to their specific equipment simulations. Learners will have the opportunity to practice as many times as necessary in the practice mode before moving on to the assessment mode, which they must pass with 100% accuracy 3 times in a row. Finally, it's necessary to regularly evaluate the learning experience and make adjustments and revisions as necessary. In this case, learners will be provided with the opportunity to evaluate the simulations for each piece of equipment that they work on.